Thank you, Candace. Okay, so our last speaker is Marian Borgensen, and she is a senior scientist of climate and clean energy programs at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and she is going to be looking forward and tell us what's coming in the future. Thanks,
Marian. So first of all, I just want to say it's such a pleasure to be here. You guys are leading the way in many ways on the climate, energy, equity, and health fights. I'm meeting with a delegation from Japan tomorrow, and I was like, well, what do you want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? And they're like, I hear these local governments in California are doing amazing things. How are they doing it? That was like their number one question. So the work that local governments are doing here is actually like, even in Japan, they're hearing about it already. So just want to give you guys some props. It's really important, the work that you do locally on the ground with contractors, with homeowners, with builders. All that work is what actually makes it happen. So thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. One of the things that sort of the theme of my talk today is how our efficiency programs evolving, what it might look like going forward, and some of the existing programs that are already either in the works or available that you guys may want to know more about. So just to start with one of my favorite oldie but goodie graphs, this is a 2012 science paper that looks at the pathways to deep decarbonization. Much of the California analysis that E3 has done is based on this original work. The most important thing about this graph are the biggest chunks. So you can see energy efficiency in that light blue up there. It's so fundamental to everything. And the question that we've been asking more and more is how can energy efficiency start to help the other pieces of the pie come together? We heard Candace also talk about energy efficiency as a way to empower local governments to have better health outcomes. Energy efficiency can be a part of so many different pieces of the solution. We think about energy efficiency from a policy perspective in a more dynamic way than NRDC did like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. The other big chunks of this graph that I think are most important are electricity decarbonization, which is really like we need more renewable electricity, and electrification, which is that yellow bar at the bottom. And the pillars of what we know is going to change our trajectory towards our 2050 goals are going to be a combination of those things. And in buildings, what this means is energy efficiency, so using the least amount of energy, which has always been true. Also electrification, so we're using the cleanest fuel possible. And then load flexibility, so that we're doing it at the right time. And some of you are probably already seeing this in programs that you're involved in or run, where energy efficiency that happens midday, like when the sun is up and we have tons of solar in the system, is actually worth less through the PUC framework, for example, than energy efficiency that happens at like 7 p.m. when the sun's going down and people are coming home. And so we have to start thinking about energy efficiency more dynamically so that we can support renewables coming on the grid, that the grid is actually able to provide us the most renewable resource possible, as well as transitioning from fossil fuels like natural gas in the state of California to electricity where possible. So this is a sort of framework we're now thinking about around building decarbonization rather than just energy efficiency. In terms of those key principles I mentioned, so gas use in buildings is a huge issue. We use about as much gas in buildings as we do in all of the power plants in the state. So it's not an insubstantial amount. And then from an air quality perspective, there's about 7 to 8 times as much NOx that come out of our buildings, our homes and commercial buildings, as from power plants in the state. So from a health perspective, it's also starting to matter more and more. And one of the reasons is that this starts to be a bigger and bigger deal is because we are cleaning up our electric supply so quickly, right? And so we start to look at what is left after we clean up our electric supply, and you really then have to look at fossil fuels, both in transportation and in buildings. So this is another evolving part of our work too. And in terms of the high efficiency electric alternatives, I know you've had much of this mentioned today, and Candace actually gave a great example. But for water heating, a huge chunk of gas used in homes, the heat pump hot water program that BACMUD is launching is a really important part of this. There's also space heating options, clothes drying options. That's really the most of really space heating and water heating, if we could just do that, would get us most of the way there. But there's alternatives for all these other pieces too. So this is, and then the other piece that Gabe asked about from the CEC was around load management. Can we actually use the new electric equipment and existing electric equipment to help shift loads or help use electricity at the right times of day? NRDC did a study looking at the power of a heat pump hot water heater to actually act as storage. One of the really good things that we learned from that study is that the load shapes of heat pump hot water heaters are already pretty darn grid friendly. And we did a study looking at every climate zone in California. The load shape that as naturally occurs without any load management actually tends to use electricity midday and use less electricity in the peak, like 5 to 7 p.m., the sort of where you might want to shave load. So that's good news. In addition, you could put often very simple controls, and this is the question about can you add controls, very simple controls to just slightly shift that use to add both economic benefits if you have customers on time of use rates, and definitely greenhouse gas and grid benefits that we can all benefit from. So in terms of the policy opportunities in California that you may be most interested in, I first have to note that Candace had a slide, and several of the programs that we think are some of the shining stars or sort of the examples of how you might start to layer these benefits and layer these incentives were on her list. So the low-income weatherization program, where in many cases they're combining solar with electrification and energy efficiency to both lower bills and drastically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, often from large multifamily buildings. So, and those are retrofits generally. So that's a really great program to look at if you guys are interested. And maybe in some of your jurisdictions, you actually already have buildings like this that are part of that program. Another example is Advanced Energy Rebuild, where Sonoma and other places have been able to layer with the wildfire rebuilds both energy efficiency money as well as funds to electrify buildings if they're interested. And I think we're going to have to, it's a hard thing to say because I've worked at the PUC a long time. I know that there's a lot of program rules and stuff that makes coordination difficult. We're probably going to have to think more and more about how we layer various types of incentives that have different benefits to offer a package to customers that is coherent and easy for them. And that's going to take us doing a lot of hard work on the front end so that it looks easy to customers. But there are multiple benefits. Like I'm saying, it's not just energy efficiency, and we're going to have a delivery product to customers, to builders, to property owners that is easy to use. And that's going to be a challenge, especially as we have new sources of money coming onto the table. And that's happening, which is fortunate. It also adds this coordination challenge. So other policy opportunities, I know you guys know about REACH codes and building codes. That's a huge one, and your leadership there has been really noticed, as I mentioned, globally. The two other that I'll talk about are PUC-funded efficiency programs and the new building decarbonization programs funded by SB 1477. So I'll talk about those more in 1 second. The other program to note is the SCHIP program, the Self-Generation Incentive Program. That, in the most recent ruling from the commissioner, he basically was asking to how do heat pump water heaters count as storage? How can we make them participate as a storage resource in our programs? And the decision put aside $4 million for low income to do heat pump hot water heaters. But there's going to be a workshop I think it's 90 days from the decision where the commission and stakeholders can come together and talk about how do we make sure that heat pump hot water heaters count as storage, how do those incentives work. It's very different potentially than subsidizing solar or subsidizing chemical storage, like battery systems that would be in a house. So that's going to be a new opportunity. Again, potentially another layer in the program stack they were able to offer your residents, but something we will be working on and we hope to work with you guys on. So in terms of the two that I mentioned, the CPUC-funded energy efficiency programs, there's two pieces that I think are worth noting that are relatively new. And Candace mentioned that the three-pronged test was drastically changed. It used to basically, it was a test that was worded in such a way that was basically impossible to pass, or it was unclear how to pass it. Some of my colleagues over 20 years ago to create the test. So I worked with them and others to try to undo what they did. And the commission has been very responsive to our request and very reasonable. And they basically gave us a new test called the fuel substitution test, which allows substitution between gas and electricity as long as the greenhouse gas emissions go down and as long as there's actually energy savings. And in my view, they basically gave us everything we asked for in a very reasonable way. At this very moment, there's a workshop, or there's a call with the Public Utilities Commission going over some of the detailed technical guidance around what that will look like to pass the test. But I have a lot of confidence that they're going to get it right, and that folks like BayREN, as well as the utilities and CCAs, are going to work to get a set of measures essentially past the test so that it can start to be used in every energy efficiency program. And the way that will work is once a measure passes the test once, it will be available to the whole state. So I'm hoping we bunch of measures pass quickly and start to roll these out within existing programs, existing energy efficiency programs, or potentially new programs that are, on a rolling basis going to be proposed. So that's a big opportunity. I know Bayren is all over that. The other opportunity that I think is worth noting is within the last set of workshops this last year within the energy efficiency proceeding, there has been a proposal to have a market transformation set of programs within the energy efficiency portfolio. And again, I think in this case, the commission basically looked to stakeholders to offer a proposal. And what we came up with was the idea that there should be a statewide market transformation program that allows a more comprehensive view of what energy efficiency can do, and not just short-term savings, but if you're actually going to transform a market and work with contractors and distributors and even manufacturers and try to figure out, like, how do you get that, whatever the product is or technology is, to ramp up over time, that you actually have a longer-term view, a sort of a more flexible set of measures and actions that you can take. And we expect that decision to be approved sometime in the next few months, though we've said that for a few months. So we'll see. The main question there is whether it'll be administered by a utility or a third-party administrator. Either way, our understanding is that if they take the recommendations that the stakeholders made, it will be a statewide program. So hopefully it will be more coherent and comprehensive for you guys to tap into. So that's something to sort of like keep track of. Hopefully that will be passed shortly, and then that piece will be rolling forward as well. For new technologies or technologies new to the California market, like a heat pump of any type, water heater, space heater, it really does require so much early work around having contractors know what it is, having customers know what it is, having building officials know that you don't need combustion safety testing. These issues have actually come up, and we've heard them in various jurisdictions. It takes a lot of groundwork in a state that is right now heated 90% by natural gas. So we're hoping that programs like this can really offer a launch pad. The other piece I wanted to talk to you about was SB 1477, which we and many people in this room helped to get passed in the last session. This offers $200 million over 4 years. We see this as a small down payment towards building decarbonization and really a focus on greenhouse gas emissions in building. It uses greenhouse gas funds taken out of the allocation from the gas utilities and basically sets up 2 programs, and these are tech and build. So BUILD is a program that will focus on new buildings, and it will incentivize new buildings that are super low emissions. The staff at the PUC and CEC have a proposal for how this will work. We'll see, how it all gets worked out. We've submitted comments and reply comments, and hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have a decision about the BUILD program. In the staff proposal, they said that the CEC should get this program. They should work with all the folks there already working on Title 24 and figure out easy ways for builders to be able to have super low emissions building, which in most cases will be all electric buildings, and make sure the incentives are aligned such that that happens on a much more higher percentage of buildings that are new will be all electric. There will be incentives available to encourage that. So that will be something to watch, especially in your jurisdictions as you're trying to get more and more of your buildings to be super low emissions, making sure that they know about the programs, making sure builders are aware of them, that customers are aware that this is an option if they're building their own house. That's for new buildings. The other program is TECH, the Technology and Equipment for Clean Heating. So this is focused on clean space and water heating. It'll be primarily for existing buildings, so really open to any building. Again, these are all residential programs to start, both of these programs. And exactly the shape that this takes is sort of up for grabs in a way. It will be about market transformation, because that's what the bill says, and about sort of upstream actions with manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and contractors to sort of set up the foundation needed for market transformation. It will likely be a third-party statewide program. So again, another opportunity hopefully for a coherent statewide program that can work with many of the local programs. This is the PUC staff, the CEC and PUC staff proposal, and this is the annual budget. So it's about half and half tech and builds. I'll save these slides so you can look at them in greater detail later. But so some of the key things to note for 1477 for local governments. That you will have the opportunity to partner with whoever administers these programs, whether it's the CEC and a third party or someone else. There will hopefully be ways to layer incentives, again, like I was saying earlier, so that you can complement these programs with your local actions. And also, one of the parts of the proposal that the staff gave, and we'll see what it turns into at the final version, is that there will be a small sort of QuickStart Grants program. And this is really an opportunity for local governments, folks who are technology providers, other people to say, hey, I have this really interesting very focused, easy to get up and running quickly opportunity, and I want a grant for $5 million to do X. We're hoping that will get through to the final proposal, but that will be something to look for hopefully in December to see if there are local government opportunities to innovate early, because it will take it will take a while to get the administration piece of the tech program up and running for statewide market transformation. And so we're hoping these QuickStart grants will sort of build on the local momentum that you guys have already started and offer some funding to do additional work quickly. So those are the key points that I have. I will take any questions, and thank you so much for having me here.
Great. Who has questions for Marian? I just wanted to appreciate your highlighting the continued need for energy efficiency. Some of us were at the California Climate Action Planning Conference, and there was a very well-attended panel on energy efficiency is, basically passe. So thank you for that comment and for all of your work, because if it wasn't for you and a few of your colleagues.
Jenny.
Hi, Kevin Mean with San Jose Clean Energy. For the tech program, do you know if incentives are going to be available for municipalities like San Jose that are implementing REACH codes? Basically, not putting incentives to developers that have to meet a code anyway.
You mean for the build program where there's new buildings?
Yes, build program. Sorry, not the tech.
That will be to be determined. It's actually something I'm quite interested in. As you probably know from energy efficiency programs at the PUC, if you've already agreed to do something, it's not additional anymore. I think that you guys should watch for that. It's not been decided yet, is the first thing. I'm hoping not, because what we want to do is encourage this activity, but I think that is a risk. So look, keep your pulse on this and make sure that you speak up when and if it comes up, and we will as well. Yep.
There is some precedent for allowing incentives for cities with REACH codes. Actually, in 2009, the Commission actually issued a decision that said that those would not be considered free riders, at least at that time, because it is an important strategy and an important policy opportunity. They did not want to disadvantage people living in communities that were more progressive.
That's great. Would you send me that decision?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you. Hey, Rich.
I'm from Berkeley Lab. On the retrofit side of the decarbonization program, a lot of the barriers are kind of not, the electric.
Yep.
So will the programs be addressing that, or you mentioned kind of mid and upstream, which is more focused on the equipment?
Yeah, the tech and build programs will not. I mean, they will not have funding for like panel upgrades, just because of the way they're structured. It'll either be a new building where it doesn't actually, it will have a panel that will be able to deal with this, or it will be an existing building where it's an upstream incentive. So no. I think this is something we have to think a lot more about. One thing to note in the three-pronged test decision, and therefore in the fuel substitution test that's now out there, the Commission basically said that entities administering programs can choose to include the costs that are associated with upgrades, i.e. panel costs or other electrical upgrade costs, or not in their program design. And so there could be some opportunity to pay for portions of those costs with efficiency programs, or to not include them if it's a cost-effective issue, depending on the administrator. So that's interesting. They basically said, do what you think is best. We want to make sure that those aren't barriers. I do think that this is something we need to think about more broadly. However, we need to upgrade panels on some homes for lots of reasons, including vehicle electrification, not just electrifying other things. So how to build this into various programs is going to be a big question, or how to have it be separately funded, perhaps even rate-based in some cases, or other options for funding that is a really big question and something we're starting to think more about. There's not like a pot of money for that right now. Great question.
And just piggybacking on that is, this is Farhad with TRC. Yeah. For electrifying, resiliency is also becoming an issue, and need for decentralized grid elements. So I think that speaks to what you were saying, that there's no defined pot of funding for that. That should be maybe, in my point of view, like one of those other building decarbonization.
Yeah.
The resiliency.
That's definitely true. And fortunately, I think the commission is thinking about this wherever they can. In the latest SGIP decision, they approved a bunch of funding to be used for resilience related to storage and sort of like some of the like short-term, especially with like community centers and low-income communities and other places that you can actually offer like a refuge for people if there's larger crises of different sorts, or even short-term power shutoffs. It's a huge thing. Yep. Feel free to contact me if anything else comes up, and I'm really glad to work.
Great. Thank you, Marian.